A very good evening to all the members of Indian Copy Editors Forum. Today we are having the fourth session of our travel series titled Break Free, and we are lucky to have Mr. Jono Linin from Australia. He is an author of three books. His latest book is Into the Heart of the Himalayas, and it traces his journey across Western Himalayas. And it was a long journey, 2,700 kilometers. That's not the distance that trekkers normally travel, but he did it and he wrote a book. And uh, I am also admitting other people, like we have Dhruv Bogra, who was in our last session. He traveled 400 days on a bicycle across the Arctic to the Andes. So
Wow.
he is also there, and I think our first speaker with whom we started the series, Shalja, she is also there, and Brigadier Hirak Kar, who actually took off on a motorcycle with one of his colleagues when that was way back in 1971. And he wrote the book in 2018. The name of the book is like Riding Pillion. So they have written one book and you have written three. So because one of the reasons could be because you have been traveling for 20 years. So over to you, Jono.
Okay, well, Vivek, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great honor actually to speak to the Copy Editors Forum because, of course, as a writer, I rely on editors a lot to make me look good. So it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you. Now, as Vivek mentioned, I traveled for 20 years of my life, but that's not my situation now. I actually work, I'm a museum curator in Australia. I work at the National Museum of Australia here in Canada, or in Australia, although I grew up in Canada and I ended up in Australia because I fell in love with a beautiful woman and I was dragged down under, and here I am. I have two small boys and I still return to the Himalayas, about every other year or so. So tonight we're talking about this book here. It's called Into the Heart of the Himalayas. It just came out earlier this year in India with Speaking Tiger Books out of Delhi, and I'm happy to say that it's done very well. It's been the bestseller in travel writing on Amazon India for on and off for quite a while. So I'm very happy that people in India have taken this book on board, and I've been getting incredible feedback from people across India. I actually spent 8 years in India on and off, and almost all of it was in the Himalayas, mainly in Ladakh and then Himachal, in J&K, and also in Rutanachal. So I know the Himalayas very well, um, and that kind of brings me to this book. As I said, I spent a long time in Ladakh. I really was deeply engaged with Ladakhi Buddhist culture. And I was going back every year because at that point I worked as a forester in Canada. And I used to go back every summer to Canada and I would work there. And what I really wanted to do was be able to bring some of that incredible goodness, the wisdom and compassion that I saw in the Himalayas into my everyday life, not just in India, but also in Canada. And I decided that the way that I could do that would be to combine, kind of immerse myself completely in the different cultures of the Himalayas. So the Islamic culture in Pakistan, the Buddhist culture in Ladakh and Spiti and Lahore, and then the Hindu culture across Garhwal and Kumwan. And I would do that. I would bring that all together in a very long walk. And that crazy plan took me, it took me kind of 2 years to organize it, and then finally I was able to do it. And so I'm gonna what I'm going to do is going to click on to some slides here. We'll look at a map first so you can see where the walk actually took place. And then there'll be a rolling set of slides that will run as I talk, and we'll probably talk for about 30 minutes or so. And any questions that you have, just put them into the chat, and Vivek will collate those. And then when I finish talking, we'll go back and we'll retrieve those, and then I'll try and answer as many of those questions as we can in the 50 minutes or 60 minutes that we have. Okay, so let me share the screen here. Now, Vivek, can you confirm that we got the screen up? Yeah, good. Okay, so here we are. Everybody out there will know where we are. We're in the very far northwest of India and into Pakistan. And if we look at the map, where I actually started is right around Gilgit area, right up there near the top of this screen. And I started walking at the confluence of the Indus and the Astor River. Then I followed over the Deosai Plateau, and I got as far as the town of Kapalu. Now, there you've pretty well reached the line of control. And of course, you can't cross the line of control. So what I had to do was go all the way back around, down to Lahore, across the border, train to Delhi, fly back up to Leh, another bus that brought me up to Kargil. And from Kargil, I started walking again. So for that 50 kilometers between Kapalu and Kargil, I had to travel 3,000 kilometers to start walking again. So from Kargil, I went down to Lamayuru, across into the Zanskar Valley, down the Zanskar Valley, over into Lahore, followed through Lahore, over into Spiti, through Spiti, down into the Sangla area, over the Rupangadi and into the Garhwal, and then I followed through the Chardham Yatra, and then finally I ended up on the Mahakali River, which is in the border with Nepal. So altogether about 2,700 kilometers, and it took me 4.5 months to walk that. And I will say that I was walking a lot. I'm walking 30 to 40 kilometers a day with a 20 to 25 kilo pack, between 3,000 and 5,000 meters. So I was in incredibly good shape when I was doing this. I should say that I was an international caliber cross-country ski racer. I raced on the international racing circuit for quite a few years. So I was in incredible shape at that point in time. If I wanted to do that walk again now, being an older man and not in as good shape, I would say it would probably take me 6 to 9 months, depending on the conditions. So we're going to roll the slides here, and then I'll give you a couple of stories about what happened along the way. Now, what's happening with my slides? Here we go. So, as I said, I started out at the confluence of the Indus and Astor rivers. And the first night, I actually stayed in a small village called Astor. And that was really interesting to me because kind of the highlight of that day was that I visited the local gun shop. This is an interesting situation in Pakistan. You know, a lot of these small towns actually have gun shops, and anybody can go in and purchase a weapon. So I went in because, you know, that's just not something that you have in Canada or in Australia. You can't just walk into a gun shop. So the man there he was a lovely fellow, and he showed me all of his goods, and we shared a cup of tea and a lot of stories. And when I left, he offered to sell me a weapon at a cut rate price. And I thought, that is exactly what I don't want on this walk. If I had a weapon, first of all, of course, I wouldn't have been able to bring it across the line of control. But secondly, what I really discovered about this walk was that by being vulnerable, by being open, by being a single man who was definitely not from the Himalayas, people opened up their houses to me. I would walk into a village and I would sit down on a step, a single white guy in the middle of the Himalayas, and within 5 minutes, people were offering me a cup of tea, and within 10 minutes, people were offering me a place to sleep. You know, that is the generosity and compassion of the people right across the Himalayas, through Pakistan, India, and into Nepal. Now, from a store, I followed up over the Deosai Plateau. You see a picture here, actually, of the Deosai Plateau. And Deosai is just a beautiful, beautiful area across the plateau. And then I came down to Skardu. Skardu is a very interesting area because that is one of the major jumping off points for climbing expeditions into the K2 area. So there's a lot of climbers there. And I had a situation where my stove wasn't working, my cooking stove, a kerosene stove. And so I had to find some parts for it. Unfortunately, I bumped into a Frenchman called Michel, who was there. He was a climber, and he took me under his wing, so to speak, and took me to the market, and we found the parts, and I took him out to lunch, and he started regaling me with all these stories of these incredibly difficult climbs that he'd been engaged on. And what was interesting to me was that it almost sounded to me that he'd been in so many dangerous situations that he almost had a death wish. And I actually asked that, Michelle, do you have a death wish? Why do you constantly put yourself into these situations? And he actually said, no. This is actually how I connect with God. He actually described himself as a climbing Sufi. When he was engaged in climbing, so completely immersed in climbing, that's when he contacted his God. And I kind of brought that with me throughout this trek because I got in a lot of very difficult and interesting situations. And I kind of started to consider that maybe this was one of my pathways into a higher consciousness. So from Skardu, I continued on down the Indus River to a town called Kapalu. And Kapalu is actually a really, really beautiful town. And what's interesting about it is, again, that's a confluence of two major rivers. And I realized that was something that was starting to define the trip, and it became really a definition of the trip, was my engagement with water and rivers. Because the way that you traverse mountains, of course, is that you follow water courses. You follow creeks and rivers up until a pass, and then you cross over and down into the next area. And that's exactly what I did the whole way across the Himalayas. So as I said, at Kapalu, I really couldn't go any farther because the line of control was so close. And from there, I went all the way back around, came up through Leh, Ladakh, and arrived again in Kargil. And Kargil is, well, of course, everybody in the audience knows about Kargil, but Kargil is not an attractive town. I will say that it's a town that you want to leave. And I was happy to leave Kargil. But a couple of days later, I had a really incredible situation in a village called Atise. And Atise is above the large monastery in Lamayuru. And some of you probably know where Lamayuru is. You know, it's a full day's drive from Leh Ladakh. It's a beautiful, beautiful monastery. And up above the monastery, probably about 3 or 4 hours walk, is a smaller village called Atise. And I walked up towards there because some people said, well, there's a really interesting gompa there. There's a really interesting monastery there that they're actually just building. So I went up there. Nobody seemed to be in the village. And of course, that was because most people were out working on the harvest. But finally, I found the caretaker with the key to this. It wasn't a monastery. It was more of a prayer hall. And I remember going into the prayer hall with this elderly gentleman who was the caretaker and had the key, and his grandson. So there was kind of 3 generations that came into this prayer hall. And I remember sitting there, and it was a long, quite a thin room with sandstone walls on either side, and quite a bit of light coming in, which isn't always very common in a Buddhist prayer room. And at the end of the hallway was this beautiful statue of the Buddha. And I remember the gentleman, he was standing there, and he dropped down and he started to prostrate to the statue, and his grandson followed him in this. And I remember I grew up in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and I grew up during the Troubles, during the Civil War in Northern Ireland, and so I've always had a bit of a conflicted relationship with religion, because the Civil War in Belfast was between Catholics and Protestants. But when I was in that prayer hall, I had this sense came over me, this sense of compassion, and I joined the old man and his grandson in their prostrations to the statue of the Buddha, and it was actually an incredibly liberating situation for me. It was a beautiful situation. And I remember coming out of that prayer hall, and it had been snowing while we'd been inside the prayer wall, and the old man took me back to his house, and we shared a cup of tea. And I hardly spoke any Ladakhi. I used to speak a lot of Hindi, but he didn't really speak any Hindi. I didn't speak Ladakhi, but we had this incredible conversation with body language. And I remember leaving there. Again, it was snowing, and I was walking down the hill 10 kilometers back to the monastery at Lama Yuru, and I felt really amazing, actually. It was a beautiful situation. I continued on through Ladakh and over into towards Zanskar. And halfway into Zanskar, there's a village there called Lingshed. And Lingshed was a great experience for me because I stayed with an old friend of mine. His name was Lama Karma, and he was a monk at the monastery there. And really, the beautiful thing about that was that I arrived there during the harvest season. So I helped Lama Karma's family harvesting their barley crop. The only crop that grows at that altitude. Rice doesn't grow at that altitude. It's only barley that will grow there. And barley is incredibly, it's very sticky and very difficult to handle. And I remember covered in barley hay and barley grass, and at one point the family got me to look after the donkeys, and I had never looked after donkeys before. I'd never seen a donkey. And for the grandfather, for the patriarch of the family, it was absolute comedy to watch me try and look after these donkeys. I think it was the highlight of his year, seeing this highly educated white fella trying to negotiate his way through harvest season in a village that at that point didn't even have electricity. There was no roads into Lingshed at that point in time. From Lingshed, I crossed over into the main Zanskar Valley and moved down the valley to Karsha. And Karsha that's the main monastery in Zanskar. It's a large monastery. There's probably about 150 monks there. And I was very fortunate again that I had some friends at that monastery, a couple of nuns, Annie Garskit and Annie Pema. And so I stayed with them, not in their room, but they managed to get me a room close to where the nunnery was. And I'll never forget, I showed up there, and they took me in, and they were actually engaged in their daily prayers, their afternoon prayers. So as soon as they finished their prayers, then they kind of came to me, and they started right away making this incredible meal, which is the local delicacy in Zanskar. It's called tukpa, it's a noodle soup. And I remember they went out and they got these fresh ingredients from people around the villages near Karsha, and they came back and they made what I think is one of the best meals that I've ever had. It was this incredible, it was a beautiful, thick broth soup, a mutton broth. And then the nuns went out and they got me some chang, which is, as a lot of you will know, is Himalayan beer. And so there I was, a young Irish Canadian guy with two nuns who'd started into chanting their prayers again to the Buddha. I had a full stomach and I had a glass of beer in my hand, and I was sitting in a nunnery. So it was a beautiful situation that I had to laugh about in retrospect. So from Karsha, we moved farther south, and what was quite interesting about that, after I went through the main town of Padum, I was following the Sarap River up towards the Shingola, and along the way, I'd been tracking this man called Dagom Rinpoche. A Rinpoche, as a lot of you will know, is a reincarnate teacher in Tibetan Buddhism. And Dagom Rinpoche is the main teacher, the main reincarnate Lama for the Zanskar Valley. And he only comes to Zanskar in the summertime. So he was there for his summer teachings. And I had kind of been following him a couple of days behind. And I remember I got to the village of Kargyu, and he had just left, and it was an incredible scene because his entourage and himself had arrived with a group of horses. Those horses had all been covered in these beautiful silken robes, and brass all over the horses. It looked like something out of a medieval traveling circus almost. Anyway, in the next village, I finally caught up with Dagom Rinpoche, and that was actually really quite beautiful because he was giving a teaching in one of the larger houses in the village, and he asked me to join him. And I sat there, and all the villagers came up and they made offerings to him. And it was Zanskar, and Zanskar is known in the Ladakh area for its dairy, for its butter and its cheese. So people would bring butter and cheese for Dagom Rinpoche, and by the end of this teaching, there was a mountain of butter and cheese that was sitting beside him. I don't know how him and his entire entourage could have made it through all that butter and cheese in over the next year. So from Kargyu, I continued on south and over the Shingola, and then at that point, I'd moved out of Ladakh. At that point, Ladakh was still, of course, part of J&K. Now it's an autonomous region. And I crossed the Shingola and came down into Himachal Pradesh. And in Himachal, I followed the Baga River through the Lahore district and up over the Kunzum La and into Spiti. And in Spiti, probably the highlight of my time in Spiti was visiting Thabo Gompa and Lalong Gompa. Some of you may know these because they are incredibly important architectural sites, because both of those Gompas are over 1,000 years old, and they're still used and they're still lived in, and so they really are an incredibly rare and precious resource. So in Thabo Gompa, I remember I arrived there, and I wanted so much to get to this place because it is one of the most special places that I've ever been to. And I remember arriving in the afternoon, and thinking, should I go to the Gompa now or should I wait for the morning? And I decided to wait for the morning, and that was probably a good idea because the next morning, just as the sun was coming up, I went over to the Gompa area from the guest house I was staying at, and I managed to find the young man who had the key to one of the main prayer halls, and he took me in there, and I remember going into this very dark, large space, and as soon as I got in there, I was overwhelmed by this sense of the age of the room and this feeling of history. It's very hard to describe, but there was something about that particular place. It almost felt that it had taken on some of the faith and the compassion and the wisdom of the probably hundreds of thousands of people who had spent time in that monastery over the past 1,000 years. And I remember standing in that room, and the sun was coming up outside, and most of those types of gompas have roof skylights where the light comes in. And the sun was coming up, the sun was coming in through this roof light. And all of a sudden, the frescoes on the walls started to, it was almost as if they were coming to life. And there was bas relief statues on the walls, and those started to come to life. And it was quite an overwhelming situation, actually. I remember I probably spent 2 hours in there just sitting, watching this room change completely from pitch black to what could only be described as an incredible art gallery that really spoke about the 1,000 years of different types of artwork that had been used to convey the philosophy of Buddhism to those people in the Spiti Valley. It was really something special. And the day after that, then I went to this other Gompa called Lalung Gompa, which is about 25 kilometers or so from Tabu. And it's a much smaller Gompa. But what was interesting about Tabu is that the Gompa itself is actually designed as a mandala. So the outside of the Gompa has these beautiful trees. At that time, we're talking in September, October, those trees were gold. The leaves were turning that golden color of larches in the Himalayas. And then there was an inner area, these walls that kind of demarcated the outer layer of the mandala. And then within that, there was a walkway. And then when you went through that, you came into the inner sanctum of the monastery. And inside the monastery, then there were deities, and there were frescoes again on the wall. And these were all deities that practitioners would have used, of course, to help them move on to a higher state of consciousness. So when I went to Lalung, it was almost like I was moving into the physical sense of a mandala. It was really almost an overwhelming situation. So from Tabo and Lalung, then I followed the Spiti River until it connected with Sutlej. I followed the Sutlej down to actually a really beautiful village called Poo, P-O-O-H. And Poo was a really interesting place because, again, I was arriving in all of these villages around the time of harvest. And as a lot of you will know, I mean, the main festivals for the year in Buddhism happen during harvest time. So I arrived in Poo for this harvest festival, and what was incredible was that everybody in the village had come out for this festival, and it was kind of being guided by the monks from that local monastery. But what was really probably more interesting to me was that there was 2 oracles that were engaged, that were part of this festival. And during the festival, then they became possessed by the local spirit of the area around Tabo, or around Poo. And incredibly, one of these oracles was a Buddhist-oriented oracle, and the other oracle was a Hindu-oriented oracle. So these two men were channeling female spirits, Buddhist and Hindu female spirits. And I thought that was incredible because this, of course, is very close to that area where there's an overlap between Hinduism and Buddhism in the Himalayas. So that was a really incredible festival. And from there, I followed farther south the Baspa River, and the Baspa Valley, in my mind, is actually one of the most beautiful valleys in India. If you ever have a chance to go there, it is an amazing place, a beautiful place. And from the village of Baspa, then I crossed over the Rupangadi into Garhwal, and that was one of the more interesting passes, because the Rupangadi actually delineates kind of the division between the northern side of the Himalayas and the southern side of the Himalayas. And as lots of you will know, there's a huge difference between the climate and the flora and the fauna between the north of the Himalaya and the south of the Himalaya, because of course on the north side there is no monsoon. So there's the south side is much greener, much lusher, and much wetter. And so the passes that you cross in Pakistan and Ladakh are much drier. You don't get much snow up there in the summertime, and it's very cold because those passes can be much higher. But on the south side of the Himalaya, of course, you can get huge snowfalls, and those snowfalls, that snow will stay there year round. So crossing the Rupangadi was actually a very difficult pass, because I had to go through snow that was up to my thighs. And at one point I got quite lost trying to get across the Rupangadi. And at one point I got to a pass that I thought was the actual pass, and I wasn't 100% sure. So I was able to triangulate with maps and my compass and realize that I was actually one pass to the east of where I should be. So I was able to adjust and get into the water course that I needed to get down into Garhwal. And that was very lucky, because if I got into the other water course, I would have gone in completely the wrong direction. But I was fortunate, as I said, I worked as a forester in Canada for 18 years. So I am quite an expert navigator. And I was gifted with an incredible, almost a vision when I came down out of the Rupangadi. I followed this creek down and into this like a slot canyon. So steep walls on either side. And just as I was getting down there, it was getting dark. The sun was setting, and I found a place to pitch my tent, and I started making my dinner. And I looked into this slot canyon, and incredibly, the sun was hitting these. There was waterfalls coming off on either side of this slot canyon. As I said, of course, it's much wetter on the south side. And this sunlight, as it was setting, was hitting these waterfalls and creating two rainbows dropping down into this valley. It was like a gift. I'd finally made it across to the southern side of the Himalayas, and whatever powers may be had given me the gift of being able to see the beauty that I'd entered into. So from there, my plan had been to follow the Char Dham Yatra, and I was able to get to Yamunotri. And now we're talking, October, late October. And as you know, this is Yatra season has finished at this point. So I was the only person up there. I went to Yamunotri. It was myself and a couple of caretakers who were there doing some repairs on the area around the Yamunotri temple. And I remember there's a beautiful hot spring at Yamunotri. And I remember slipping into that hot spring that evening. And I think it was the first hot bath I'd had in months at that point. And up above me, there was deodar cedars, and there was fresh snow on those cedars. And I was, it was just another one of those incredibly beautiful situations where you find it hard to believe that you've been gifted with this life. And the next day I started walking again, of course, because that's what I did. And from Yamunotri, I followed rivers and passes until I got over to Gangotri. And from Gangotri, I went up to the source of the Ganga at Galmuk, and again, I was gifted with something really, really beautiful, and that was I was arriving at Galmuk again just as the sun was setting, and anybody who's been there to Galmuk will know that the river, the Ganga, actually emanates from the base of Galmuk Glacier, and it comes out as this. It's not just a little trickle; it comes out as a fully fledged, beautiful river. And I was arriving at the source of the river just as the sun was setting. So up above the glacier is kind of pinned in between these peaks, these ice peaks. And the sun was setting, so it was going through those colors, like there was rubies and coral colors, these beautiful copper colors. And then the face of the glacier was right there in front of me. And as a lot of you will know, the glacial ice is the color of turquoise. So there was turquoise and coral. And interestingly, every Tibetan child receives turquoise and coral stones when they're born because they're protective stones. And I thought to myself, wow, there's something very special in this. This is a landscape of protection in a way, coral and turquoise. And that's exactly what I felt when I arrived there at the source. And the next day I left again, kept walking. Then it was on to Badrinath. And interestingly, Kedarnath and Badrinath, I wasn't able to get to. When I was going to Kedarnath, up towards Kedarnath, again, we're talking the end of October, I could see Kedarnath temple ahead of me about 5 kilometers, and the police came down the trail and they said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to the temple. I'm on the Chardam Yatra." And they said, no, you can't go. It's too dangerous. And I kind of said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "No, it's too cold. You might freeze." And, I could have spent a lot of time telling them, well, I come from Canada in the wintertime, it's -20 in Canada, and I've just walked from Ladakh where I've been sleeping at -20 at 5,000 meters. But, I know that in India, it can be difficult to talk to the police. So I decided the best idea would be to turn around and keep walking the other way. And that's what I did. And then the same situation happened to me at Badrinath. I got to Joshimath, and you actually had to get a permit to go up to Badrinath at that time of year. And so I went to the district commissioner's office to get a permit, and his assistant was there. And I said, I just need to get the DC to sign this paper for him. And he said, "Oh, but the DC isn't here. He's actually visiting some villages." And I said, "Oh, okay. Do you know when he's going to be back?" And the assistant said, No, we don't know when he's going to be back." And of course, this was in the days before mobile phones. And, now, of course, he could just phone the DC and say, "Well, sir, when are you going to be back?" But of course, in those days, there was no schedule and there was no idea when the DC was going to be back. So I went back to the DC's office for 3 days in a row, and they still couldn't tell me when the DC was going to be back. So I decided, no, this is too much. I got to keep walking here. And I did. I just kept walking, and went through Gualdam. I had an interesting situation in Gualdam because there I was gifted with this incredible vision of Nanda Devi, because again, I was there at sunset and I was looking at Nanda Devi. And again, we had that situation where the mountain itself, and those of you out there who have seen Nanda Devi personally know that it has this incredible face to it that goes through that when the sun hits it in a particular light will just go through these shades of color. And as people say, it looks as if Nanda Devi, as if the goddess is dancing. That is exactly what it looked like to me that particular evening. It's something that's etched in my mind. And then from Gualdam, I crossed over into Kumuan and followed again rivers and passes across Kumuan until I got to the Mahakali River. And at the Mahakali River, I could have crossed into Nepal, but to me, that was the perfect place for me to finish this trek because, of course, Kali is the great goddess of death, Mahakali, and the Mahakali River actually starts from up in the area close to Mount Kailash, which is sacred for Hinduism and Buddhism. And I thought to myself, this is the place where I have to finish this trek. And I remember taking a bath in the Mahakali River, as a purification ceremony for myself, so that I could feel a sense of completion about this. And that's what I hoped out of it, but it isn't actually what happened to me, because after that, after I finished the walk, I went to Dharamsala, and I wanted to write a book about the trek, and I did. I spent 3 months in Dharamsala, and I wrote a manuscript, and I remember I'd never written a book before, so this was a real sense of completion for me. And being an Irish Canadian guy, I wanted to have a celebration around that, so I went and had a few beers. And a couple of days later, then I came back to start editing the manuscript of this book. And I remember reading through it and thinking to myself, wow, this is junk. This is awful writing. And no one is ever going to read this. And no one is ever going to publish this. And that for me was really frustrating because, I'm a storyteller. I'm a writer. I'm a person, I'm a curator at a museum. My job is to tell stories. And I hope you can feel from the way that I'm explaining this situation that magic happened every day on that trek, and none of that was coming through in this manuscript that I'd written. Now, a lot of you will say as editors, well, what I really needed was an editor. But actually, I consider what was going on there was that this was the start of my second journey. And the second journey was actually understanding what that walk was about and how I could convey the magic that had happened to me every day in the Himalayas. And so that's what I spent the next 10 years doing. I spent 10 years writing this book, trying to find that magic and get it down on the paper. And so, first of all, in that first draft, what I'd really written was a guidebook. It was like a Lonely Planet guide about how a single person could walk 2,700 kilometers alone through the Himalayas. Now, guidebooks, they're not that engaging. They're very useful to have, but as entertainment, they're not that interesting. So I realized that I had to dig deeper. I had to find what had it been about the Himalayas that had really, drawn me in and attracted me. And of course, first of all, I figured that it must be the culture of the Himalayas. I'd been so engaged in Buddhism in Ladakh and Islam in Pakistan and through the Char Dham Yatra. So I went back and researched the culture of the Himalayas and wrote another draft and read through it and thought, oh, wow, okay, that's, it's better, but it's not there. And then I thought, okay, well, I've got to, there's a lot more going on there. Well, what about the flora and the fauna? So again, I spent years researching the flora and the fauna of the Himalayas and inserting that into this very long walk through the Himalayas. Again, it was getting better, but it still wasn't there. And then, I thought, okay, what about the sacred geography? I've been to all of these incredible pilgrimage places across the mountains. So again, more research, more writing, more insertion of this wisdom and this knowledge into the manuscript. And it was getting there. But it still wasn't able to convey the experiences that I'd had. And about that point, I was living in Kathmandu, and a friend of mine there was an editor, thank God. And I handed, she said, "Well, let me read through the manuscript and let me give you some feedback." So I gave her the manuscript, and she went through that, and was, a couple of days later, she said, "Come on, let's get together and we'll talk about it." And so we went out to dinner that night, and I remember she showed up. She showed up with 3 or 4 pages of notes, and I thought, well, that's great. She spent time really looking through this. But this was 3 or 4 pages on the first couple of pages of my manuscript. And we had a long conversation, and what she was really getting at when we broke the critique down was that she thought that something else was going on with this book. I told her lots of stories about what had happened on the walk, and she said, "Yeah, but it's not coming across the way that you tell it is different than the way you've written about it here. There's something else going on in the background that you haven't touched on in this manuscript." And I kind of said, I don't think she really understands what I'm talking about here, because this was my trek through my Himalayas, and it's my book. And of course, that's a very selfish approach. But a couple of days later, I was sitting in my hotel room in Kathmandu, and I was actually editing that section of the book where I arrived at the source of the Ganga. And that was, as I've said, oh, there's a picture of Gangotri right there. And that was a really incredible time for me. It was because when I got to Gaumuk, just as the sun was setting and those incredible colors were in the sky on the face of the glacier, I remember sitting there at the source of the river, and I just wanted to be in that place, be with that place. And I remember sitting there quietly, and I felt this heat rising up my spine, and all of a sudden I was crying. I had this outpouring of emotion, and I'd always thought that incredible outpouring of emotion was about being in this incredible piece of geography, at the source of one of the greatest rivers in the world and the greatest river of Hinduism. And in that hotel room in Kathmandu, I remember reading through that section of the manuscript and having this sense of deja vu at that point, and thinking, what the heck is going on here? I've been here before. I've had that feeling before. That because there was something reminiscent about that, about the light that was there, that half light that you get at sunset. There was something there about the temperature, that really cool temperature. There was something there about that, that feeling, complete stillness. I was 4,500 meters in the Himalayas, and there wasn't a breath of wind. And then in a flash, in this incredible flash, I realized that the last time I'd been in that situation was when I had seen my brother's body dead in a hospital morgue in Canada. My younger brother Gareth had died in a tragic boating accident in Canada when he was 18 years old. And they spent days trying to find his body at the bottom of this lake, and finally they found it. And I remember going with my mom and my sister to the hospital morgue and identifying his body. And they pulled his body out, and I saw him there. And it was that same half light and that same coolness that I'd felt at Galmuk, and that same complete stillness. And then I realized, of course, that this book and this very long walk alone through the Himalayas were not about me being the first person to solo trek the length of the Western Himalayas. This was not just about me understanding the cultures and the flora and the fauna and the meteorology and the geology of those incredible mountains. It was actually about coming to terms with that universal story that we all have to understand and bring into us in this life. And that is, of course, the death of a loved one. And when I understood that that was actually what this was all about, I went back to the manuscript and I rewrote it again and inserted all of these all of these interactions that myself and my younger brother had had over the years, and realized that so many of those magical moments that I'd had in the Himalayas had relationships back to times that I had spent with him. So actually, what that what that long walk was about was a pilgrimage towards my brother and what his death meant to me. And in a way, it was a very long darshan with my brother. It was a way for me to understand who he was, not alive but dead, and how that would affect me, not negatively but positively, how I could learn from that into the future. And for that, I am, incredibly thankful to, first of all, the Himalayas itself, but secondly, the incredible generosity of the people across the Himalayas in helping me to understand that. It took me 10 years to get there, to understand what it was all about, but eventually I did get there. And again, I'm just thankful that I had that time and that energy to be able to write this book, because I hope that when people read this book, they understand it not just as an adventure story about the first person to walk alone the length of the Western Himalayas, but it's a story, it's a universal story of how we all have to understand and incorporate the personal losses that we have in this life. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing now. And again, thank you for that. Maybe we can take a few questions now, Vivek.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jono. That was an incredible storytelling session, and I just can't explain what I and what of the participants felt. It's all in the chat box, and there are a few questions about your travel in the Kargil area. Uh, Brigadier Hirak Karhi is asking, did you visit village Darchik, which claims to have people of pure Aryan race?
Yeah, at that point in time, you couldn't go to Darchik because it's actually, from Kargil itself, you can see the line of control, but Darchik is actually a little bit to the northeast of Kargil, and at that time, you weren't able to go there. But I have met these people, these Aryan people, because they go to Leh every once in a while. And that's what they say. They definitely look different than Ladakhi people, but what can I say about that? I'm not an anthropologist, so I couldn't confirm that or not.
There are there are actually three villages in that area. One is Darchik, and I forget the name of the other two villages. They are slightly off the main road, so you can reach over there. But the claim is that they are pure Aryan people of Aryan race. And I've been to this village, this Darchik village, not the others, which is somewhere beyond a place called Batalik. I don't remember the name of the village.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe it's possible now. Yeah.
No, I'm talking of 30 years ago.
Yes. But I think you were in the military then, weren't you?
Yeah, I was in the military.
Yeah. So there's the difference.
I'm talking of 30 years ago, so I don't know what is the state now.
Yes. No, it's an incredible area, everyone. I mean, I hope everybody has the chance to get up into. Ladakh is definitely one of my favorite areas in India. One of my favorite places in the world, actually.
Dhruv, I would like to unmute yourself. Maybe it's better if you share your comment in your own voice.
Are you speaking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in complete awe because, it's really amazing what you've done. I had taken this journey from the Arctic to the Andes, right through
Mm.
Canada and the Yukon 4 years back, and I can completely relate to the kind of the wilderness and the remote areas you went through. Unfortunately, because I was cycling, I was moving faster than you were walking. So, so maybe the trick is to actually walk your way through life. But yes, I can completely relate to the experiences that you had, the generosity, the compassion. I had a lot of learnings with the indigenous people in the Yukon as well, which made a very big
Mm,
impact. The Maya people in Central America, and then in the Quechua in the Andes. So yes, I had very similar experiences, but yes, I was not fortunate to have spent too much time in the villages and interact with the locals at the level of depth that you were able to. And
mm,
I wish I'd had more time to do that. And whenever I do undertake my next expedition, uh, mine was about a year and a half long. So I'm not
yeah.
sure how long I can really stay away now. But it really does make sense to maybe do shorter trips, but go deeper into the local culture and immerse yourself in that.
Well, I think,
I've been cycling in the Himalaya for about many years now, and I just came out with my second book, but which is a very small book on some trips I made in various parts of the Himalayas. But one of my dreams is to do exactly what you did, but on a bicycle. And
mm,
my question is, from your experience and memory, how much of that entire that traverse that you did, how much of it is actually rideable, or most of it you have to walk through various trails?
well, Dhruv, the interesting thing is that, this walk was 25 years ago.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
now there are a lot more roads through the Himalaya, and especially in that Ladakh area. Back then there was very few roads. Now, of course, it's been a priority for border roads to build in that area. And I just heard a few weeks ago that there's now a secondary road into Zanskar,
yeah.
connecting Zanskar down into Himachal, which is to me just unbelievable, because I can't believe that anybody could build a road there because the topography is so steep. And then also, through Lahore and Spiti, there's many more roads now. So I think that mountain biking in that area and gravel biking in that area would actually be a fantastic way to see the area now. Now, I will say, Dhruv, that I've done a lot of cycle touring myself, in Canada and in Europe. Um, and for me, there is a little bit of a difference in that, it's about the speed that you travel. I actually, my last book came out last year, and it's actually about the psychology and the philosophy of walking, and how human beings, for 4 million years, we've been up on two legs walking. And the way that we think actually changes when we start to move on two legs at 4 kilometers an hour, which is our average pace. We actually start to think more creatively, and this actually relates back to when we were hunter gatherers, because we had to
Yes,
think on the move. And it's almost as if that moving on two legs starts this process. It actually does start a neurological process in us, that we start to think in this particularly creative way. And also, we are almost built to take in the sights around us at that 4 kilometers an hour. We know there's a huge difference between what we bring in psychologically, walking at 4 kilometers an hour, as opposed to driving our cars or being on the train, never mind being on a plane. When we're on the train, you're just watching stuff go by. You're not
yes,
actually taking anything in. When you're on your bicycle, yeah, you're taking much, much more in. You're getting an interaction with the landscape that doesn't happen when you're on the train or in your car. When you're
yes,
walking, that interaction actually increases even more, because you're walking at the same pace as people in the villages. They're walking beside you, and you're actually having conversations as you go along. Um, Now, a big connection between walking and cycling alone, I think, is that when you are a person traveling alone, I don't think it really matters almost anywhere where you are in the world. People take you in. People
Yes.
are innately hospitable. People
Yeah.
are innately generous. They feel this almost a responsibility to look after travelers who are alone. And that is completely different than if you show up in a village in the bus with
Yes. Yes.
23 of your friends.
Correct.
People are not
Absolutely.
going to
Yes.
invite 23 people into their house for a cup of tea.
Yes. True. True. Absolutely. Yes. And there is a romance about, coming across a lone traveler, because people
Yes,
have this dream that of
yeah,
doing it themselves someday. So, but whatever responsibilities that kind of keep sort of hold them back. But yes,
yeah.
man, I think was born intuitively to travel and to walk and explore. So when they see a similar explorer, I think heart goes out to them.
I think absolutely you're right. People are, I had a great conversation a few weeks ago with the Norwegian explorer and writer Erling Kagge, who she was the first person to ski to the North Pole, the South Pole, and then climb Everest. And he writes beautiful books about
Okay.
walking and about philosophy and about silence. And his philosophy, personal philosophy, is that everybody is an explorer. Everybody, and we all have evidence of this. Look at your
Yes.
children. What do they want to do in that first year of life? They want to walk, you know?
Yes.
They spend all of this energy getting up on 2 feet. It'd be much, much, much easier to stay down on the ground on four legs, on two hands and two legs, crawling around like all the other animals. But us humans want to stand up on two legs, and then we go. Once those kids learn to walk, I remember when my kids learned to walk, we had to put cushions on everything because they were going everywhere. We were worried they're going to fall down the stairs. As
Yeah.
soon as you get them outside, what do they want to do? They want to walk off in one direction and explore.
Yes.
Humans are explorers, and we
Yes.
cannot, we have to keep that in us all through our lives. That's not something we should just have as children. We are
Yes.
explorers. Go out for a walk. Everybody, I tell you now, tomorrow, go out for a walk. Just go off
Yeah.
in one direction and see what you
Yeah.
see. That is the beauty of what it is to be a human. Seeing
Yes.
new things, taking in new knowledge, learning new things. We are blessed with this one life. So let's take advantage of it.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's a great message. I'm going to
Okay,
order your
well,
book for
I,
sure.
I, I
All
apologize,
your
but I
books.
probably have to go now. It's now
Okay.
10:30 in
So
Australia.
much. We
And I want to
really
say
enjoyed your session.
namaste, namaste, namaste.
Namaste.
Thank
All the
you so
best.
much.
Namaste. Thank you.
It
Thank
was a
you.
great, great pleasure to talk to everybody here. And again, my job as a writer and a curator is so much better because of all the editors out there. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Juno. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Vivek. It's a wonderful session.
Yeah, thanks,
Lovely.
Jono. Thanks, Jono, for a
Absolutely great.
wonderful session. And everyone praised your pictures. I was tempted, like I'm tempted to ask which camera you use because they are so lifelike.
Oh, Vivek, this was back in the day. It was a Nikon SLR with film in it. It wasn't digital.
Yeah, and I must
But
compliment you on that. It's fantastic photography.
Mm.
Yeah.
A long time ago. When I tell my kids there was film in it, they don't even know what that means.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you.
yeah, bye,
Bye-bye.
Jono.
Bye. Bye. Lovely meeting you. Bye. Thanks, Vivek, for this wonderful travel session.
Yeah,
Very
like
amazing.
I feel this series is going to be life changing.
Yes, yes. Very inspiring. Very
Yeah,
inspiring.
because while I was like listening to him, the thought process that was going inside was like, what am I doing in a city? I should be out. I should be out, like exploring the nature. So much beauty that God has given us on our planet. And as he said, we have just one life, and
Yes.
it's so unpredictable. So it's better
Yes.
we go out and have a walk, or go on a cycle or a mobile, or like on a motorcycle, whatever. Although
And
after listening to him, you said you want to walk. I don't know what Brigadier Hirakar's plans are,
he's
but
going to cycle to start with.
I've,
I'm going to walk. I'll
I
walk.
am also going to walk. I will walk this evening.
I
I've,
walk
I've,
every
Very
day.
inspiring.
I've
I walk
actually,
every day anyway. Every
I've,
single day.
I've actually walked all this area, not walked, I've actually traveled all this area, and my route used to be like this, or my itinerary used to be like this. When I would go from Leh to Kargil for a visit, en route, I would stop at one or two gompas. On my return, I would stop at one or two other gompas. There are some beautiful places like the Moonland. There is one place from where I collected a lot of garnets, let's say, near Payangso Lake, the Garnet Hill. There are a lot of beautiful things to do over there, but that was 50 years ago. My advice to all those who want to travel to that area would be have some army friends. Get in touch with some army friends for nothing. Basically, in case you're in a medical problem, he can help you because the
Brigadier
high
Car,
altitude.
Brigadier
Yeah,
Car. I think we already have some army friends. We have you, we have Nirja, we have Inderpreet, and there would be others also.
I think Anna Bharti, Paul, right? She
yeah.
also have somebody
See,
from
now, now I'm retired. I'm talking of people who are there, posted there now.
For serving, yes, correct.
When I was
Then,
there, when
then
I
we will
was there,
get Brigadier Car. Then we will get in touch with your son. He is also in the army.
that's right. Because when I was there, I helped a lot of tourists, Indians and foreigners, while traveling. A lot of tourists,
Yeah,
and
army,
you
army people. They always come to the rescue whenever we are in a soup. So
Yes, and I think even today, if somebody walks up to anywhere in the army area, they'll definitely help without connections. Also, army is built for helping.
That is true. That is very true.
when this Vivek, when we started talking about break free sessions, I didn't really thought that this is going to catch the attention in such a grand manner. All right, so week on week, this is becoming better and better. And as a person who is inspired by people who travel and share their experiences, my question would be, maybe one of the future sessions, some of these experts who already undertook, the expeditions may share their experience about the preparations. Okay, so when I mean certainly when it's about casually talks about why barley was harvested, not rice, or sharing his ability to speak in Hindi, not in Ladakhi, or about how he would or he did tackle policemen when they asked him to turn back. So those are not just knowledge that he derived from a book, but those are all experiences he derived or preparations that he made before the trip. So what things should one consider before taking out a trip? So I would like to have a session from one of these, or maybe a panel discussion by these people who already undertook this and kind
yeah,
of.
yeah, we can have a panel, like we can have Brigadier Kar, Dhruv Bogra, Shelja, and like our future speakers also. Dhruv, I think, had covered some part of this, like regarding the preparations he made for his trip.
Mm,
So
yeah.
so so you will have to order maybe his book also. I don't know whether that part is covered in the book.
It's covered to some extent. In the second book, it's more extensive.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
The Away. The second book
Yes.
is Away.
Yes. Yes.
And my list of books to order is becoming longer. Like I'm not so prompt. I was reading in the chat box, so many people had already ordered. And Jyotirmoy, I don't know whether he's still there.
Yeah, I
Vivek,
think
I
Jyotirmoy.
need to go as well. So I'll leave the session now to all of
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
And
sure. Thank.
thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I feel really happy that I was able to attend today's session.
Yeah, we will.
Last time I
We
missed
will.
Venkatesh's session last time, but
We will invite you for all sessions whenever you
thank
can
you so
make
much.
time.
Thank you. Thank
Because
you.
it actually helps us also because you can
Yes.
connect to the fellow traveler.
And also it's continuing inspiration for me personally because I don't want to get into the rut of that life again, and I'm beginning to feel it now. So I also need a kick.
Okay.
So great. So thanks a lot, and best of luck to all of you, and have a nice weekend. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dhruv, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for taking out the time. And
Thank you.
tomorrow, I think we are going to have another grand session. As I had mentioned in my LinkedIn post today, the figure of 100 has been eluding me. Now, a Zoom session, we can have a maximum of 100 people, and we have had 70 till now. So I hope for tomorrow's session we are able to touch that figure. We have 150 plus registrations, and it's a very nice topic about academic publishing, scholarly publishing, how it goes about, what are the markets, what are the challenges. We have an experienced speaker, and I hope we started with a half century when we had the first session with Murugraj, and I hope we can complete the century tomorrow. So please be there at 11 a.m. tomorrow morning.